Picture this. You're sitting at home minding your own business when suddenly the government decides you need a digital ID card to prove you're allowed to exist and work in your own country. Sounds dystopian, doesn't it? Like something out of a Black Mirror episode where the state tracks your every move and you're reduced from a free citizen to a barcode in a database. Well, that was almost reality until Sir Keir Starmer performed yet another spectacular U-turn, adding to Labour's ever-growing collection of policy reversals. We're talking about the 13th U-turn in just months, which at this point isn't governance, it's a political gymnastics routine. Broadcaster Carole Malone absolutely tore into the Prime Minister over this latest shambles, and honestly, her takedown was so thorough it deserves its own highlight reel. So today, we're diving into the digital ID card debacle, why it was a terrible idea from the start, and what this latest flip-flop tells us about a government that seems to have absolutely no clue what it's doing. Quick favor, if you're enjoying this already, hit that subscribe button and smash the bell icon. Over 94% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. It's totally free, takes literally 1 second, and it genuinely helps us keep making these videos. Cheers if you did. Right, back to the chaos. So, let's set the scene properly, because this digital ID card saga is peak Starmer government in all its confused, contradictory glory. The plan, as unveiled by the Prime Minister back in September, was to introduce a mandatory digital identification system for right-to-work checks. The stated aim, cracking down on illegal working by migrants. Sounds reasonable on the surface, doesn't it? Except when you scratch beneath that surface, you find a policy that's simultaneously authoritarian, pointless, expensive, and deeply un-British. It's the governmental equivalent of solving a problem you don't really have by creating a massive bureaucratic nightmare that everyone hates. Classic Whitehall thinking, really. Fast forward to this week, and Chancellor Rachel Reeves appeared before cameras to insist that yes, it would still be compulsory to provide identification to prove your right to work in the UK. But here's the kicker. She signalled this would no longer be limited to the shiny new digital ID scheme that Starmer had been banging on about for months. Translation, they're backing down. Again, without actually admitting they're backing down, because that would require acknowledging they got it wrong in the first place, and heaven forbid this government ever admits to making a mistake. It's the political equivalent of saying, I'm not lost, I'm just taking a more scenic route, whilst driving in circles around a roundabout. Enter Carole Malone, who absolutely let rip on today's episode of the Daily Espresso podcast. And when I say let rip, I mean she went full nuclear mermaid on this policy. Malone pointed out what should have been blindingly obvious from the start. Nobody actually wanted digital ID cards anyway. Her verdict? This is just another stupid, costly experiment by a Prime Minister and a government who have no clue what they're doing. Stupid, costly, clueless. That's not gentle political criticism. That's a full demolition job, and frankly, it's hard to argue with her assessment. When even broadcasters who spend their lives covering politics are openly calling the government stupid and clueless, you know things have gone spectacularly wrong. But Malone didn't stop at calling the policy stupid. She went deeper, touching on something fundamentally important about British identity and our relationship with the state. She said, I just don't think ID cards are very British, because what it says, essentially, is that you don't trust your own people, and it changes the relationship you have with the state. It means you are kind of the property of the state. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how citizens relate to government. In Britain, we've historically operated on the principle that you're free unless you're doing something wrong. You don't need permission to exist, to move around, to live your life. But mandatory ID cards flip that entirely. Suddenly, you need to prove you're allowed to do things, and the burden of proof shifts from the state having to justify restricting your freedom to you having to justify exercising it. Malone continued with an even more powerful point. She said, Brits are born free, but if you are forced to have an ID card, you become a number. Born free but reduced to a number. It's poetic, but it's also profoundly true. There's something deeply dystopian about the idea that your existence, your right to work, your identity itself becomes contingent on having the right digital credentials in a government database. It transforms citizens into data points, people into profiles, individuals into inventory. And for what? To solve a problem that already has solutions implemented in a way that's more expensive and intrusive than what we currently have. The practical objections are just as damning as the philosophical ones. Malone said, "What bothers me just as much is that it will cost a lot of money and serve absolutely no purpose." And she's absolutely right. We already have systems for checking right to work. Employers already have to verify that people are legally entitled to work in the UK. The infrastructure exists. What digital ID cards would do is add another layer of bureaucracy, another database to maintain, another system to secure, another thing that can go wrong, be hacked, or malfunction. And all of that costs money, lots of money. Money that could be spent on literally anything else that might actually improve people's lives. But no, apparently the priority is building a digital surveillance system that nobody wants and that won't actually solve the problem it's supposedly designed to address. Here's where Malone really hit the nail on the head regarding the political implications of this latest U-turn. She pointed out that this reversal wouldn't gain Starmer votes at the ballot box because people don't forgive being messed around. And she's spot on. Voters might disagree with your policies, but what they really hate is being treated like idiots, being told something is essential, vital, necessary for national security one month, and then watching the government quietly back away from it the next month without explanation or apology. It breeds cynicism and distrust, and frankly, Labour is breeding enough of both to start a farm at this point. Every U-turn chips away at credibility. Every reversal makes the next promise sound hollower. Every climb down makes people wonder if anyone in Downing Street actually has a plan beyond announce something, see what happens, panic, reverse course. But Malone saved her most damning criticism for last, touching on something that genuinely should concern everyone, regardless of political affiliation. She said, "I don't trust this government and this Prime Minister to respect the information included on an ID card." ID cards would have been another step down the authoritarian road we are heading down. This is another tool to put us under the cosh. Under the cosh is not hyperbole. That's a legitimate concern about government overreach. Because once you've built a comprehensive digital ID system, once you've got everyone's data in a nice, accessible database, the temptation to use it for purposes beyond the original stated aim becomes overwhelming. Mission creep isn't a bug in these systems, it's a feature. What starts as right-to-work checks becomes tracking movements, monitoring purchases, profiling behavior, linking databases together until the state knows everything about everyone.
The fundamental problem here is one of perception versus reality. The government wants to be seen as tough on illegal migration. They want to project an image of control, of decisive action, of modern, innovative approaches to age-old problems. And in theory, using social media to communicate government work makes sense. We live in a digital age. People consume information on these platforms. Transparency about enforcement activities could theoretically build public confidence. But there is a massive gap between theory and execution. What the government has actually created is a piece of content so tone-deaf, so obviously performative, that it has become a lightning rod for mockery. The dramatic music, the action movie editing, the whole vibe of it screams, "trying too hard." It feels like when your dad tries to use youth slang and somehow makes everything infinitely more awkward. How do you do, fellow border security enthusiasts? It is the governmental equivalent of that. And here is the truly delicious irony in all of this. The government launched this TikTok account presumably to control the narrative around migration and border security. They wanted to show strength, competence, results. Instead, they have handed their critics an absolute gift. They have created a focal point for every joke, every criticism, every ounce of skepticism about their migration policies. The comment section of that lone video has become a digital town square where the British public is exercising its God-given right to take the absolute piss out of authority figures who have made themselves look silly. The question we must ask is, what were they thinking? Did nobody in the entire chain of approval for this project raise their hand and say, hang on, might this come across as a bit daft? Was there no moment of reflection where someone thought perhaps a social media account is not the solution to a complex humanitarian and political crisis? The fact that this made it through multiple levels of government bureaucracy and political oversight without anyone pumping the brakes is genuinely fascinating from a decision-making perspective. You also have to spare a thought for the poor social media manager who has been assigned to run this account. Imagine that job description. Wanted, social media expert to make illegal immigration enforcement engaging and shareable. Must be comfortable with constant mockery and single-digit engagement rates. Thick skin essential. Apply within. That person is currently living through what can only be described as a professional nightmare. They are the face of one of the most ridiculed government initiatives in recent memory, and they have to keep posting through it all with a stiff upper lip. What makes this entire situation even more absurd is the timing. We are in January 2026. TikTok is hardly new or cutting edge anymore. If the government had launched this 5 years ago, it might have seemed innovative, ahead of the curve. But now it just looks like everyone finally caught up to what young people were doing in 2019 and decided to copy it without understanding why it worked in the first place. It is the policy equivalent of your mum finally getting Snapchat just as everyone has moved on to the next thing. The broader context here matters too. This is not happening in a vacuum. The UK has been grappling with migration issues for years. The small boats crisis has dominated headlines. Different governments have tried different approaches, from the Rwanda scheme to increased channel patrols to international agreements. Some of these approaches have been more successful than others. Some have been controversial. Some have been legally challenged. But what they all had in common was that they were actual policy interventions, not marketing exercises.